Well, folks, I got to tell you, I'm thinking LSU, both forward in September, but also based on the conversation I had with one Matt Zemek this afternoon, also thinking about history. But Lincoln Riley and coaching staff, they're thinking 2025. We will put it all together for the next hour here on USC Trojans Live, Trojan Conquest Live. This has to be the aberration of all my shows, of course. I cannot keep that straight. Trojan Conquest Live right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you being here Mondays and Fridays, 7 o'clock Pacific time where it counts there on the West Coast, flanked by Matt Zemek, the aforementioned one Trojans Wire, and of course Tim Prangley, also from Trojans Wire. They are so blessed at that establishment. Guys, how we doing tonight?
Doing well. And Mark, you briefly and indirectly referred to this, but hey, for the USC channel members at the Voice of College Football, Mark and I, 3 bonus cuts, 3 new extra segments in the can for our members to enjoy. So as promised, adding to our stock of bonus episodes for our cherished members here at the Voice of College Football.
Sign up, folks. And I tell you, Matt, if we weren't both so busy, I could talk for 4 or 5 hours on these topics with you. Always learn something from Matt. There's no question about that. Absolutely. So some really good deep dives on USC football, past and present, majoring on the past, this past conversation we had this afternoon. But again, as I mentioned off the top, Riley and company looking toward the future with a couple more 2025 commits over the last week. We've got a wide receiver coming in, Corey Sims, by way of St. Louis, 54th rated wide receiver in the country, according to 247 Sports. Tim, any thoughts on Corey Sims?
Just a talented guy. I mean, he's constantly shown interest in USC. I know that he was being heavily recruited by Juju Lewis. He's just a big-bodied, strong receiver, I think. Very physical guy, 6'3", so he's got that physical size. Really excited. Just an added compliment, another blue chip receiver. That's one thing we can count on always at USC. We might have trouble at some other positions in the past. I think those issues are going away. But one thing you could always count on is getting, he's a composite 4-star, as you see right there. I don't pay too much attention to that. I just look at his size. I look at his offer sheet. Mark, USC will not have issues at quarterback and wide receiver. And the good news is positions where we've semi-struggled a little bit in the past are also starting to look better and better. We could talk about it a little bit later. Any ideas, Matt, on any thoughts on Sims?
Well, a couple things that stand out. One is that we beat out Penn State for him. So like you're beating a Big Ten competitor. That certainly means something. So not only you're gaining, but Penn State isn't gaining. And the other thing is, this is a St. Louis-based prospect, and Missouri is a projected top 10, top 15 program this year. So like this is Missouri's high point. You're catching Missouri right now where the Tigers are doing really well. And yet Lincoln Riley is still able to get him, pull him away from Columbia, bring him out to Los Angeles. So the competition that USC fended off, very impressive and also very important, certainly in terms of Penn State. So like this is not just the pickup itself, but who USC outfoxed to get the pickup. That also matters.
Yeah, it sends a message. And just to add on to that, Matt, it's not just like Eli Drinkwitz, who I've been critical of in the past, prior to 11-2 last year, had a sub 500 record at Missouri, but it's not as though they necessarily stumbled into this 11-win season. The recruiting uptick at Mizzou, they are in on talented players. They are not backing off from anyone of the high caliber variety. So that is not necessarily something to be shunned when USC is able to fend off a St. Louis kid from going to Mizzou and Eli Drinkwitz. We also had a cornerback come in here in the last week. And again, USC goes to Georgia for this commit, the cornerback Shamar Arnoux, 60th rated at his position, top 76 player in the state of Georgia. Again, those are the 247 Sports composite rankings.
Yeah, just again, another talented defensive player. We're stacking that defense. Just coincidentally happens to go to the same high school that Juju Lewis goes to, which again continues to point good signs. Sims and Arnoux both committing to USC. I think at this point it is pretty safe to say it's never right. It's never done. It's recruiting to the very end, but things are pointing more and more towards Julian Smith being USC Trojan. But yes, I mean, good size. It continues just that quarterback position. USC is really favoring just physical, tall cornerbacks, rangy guys. And Arnoux is just another addition to that very tall, very rangy cornerback room.
Tim, was it 1 week ago or was it 2 weeks now that we had our Sky is Falling edition of Trojan Conquest?
I'm blocking it out. It's been a couple of weeks. I mean, it wasn't me. I know that I've been following recruiting for how many years now? I mean, although we have NIL right now, it doesn't mean that the recruiting game has changed. Sure, some of the reasons these flips happen have changed, but the cloak and dagger, the last minute switches, all this stuff is nothing new. And as much as I keep hearing Trojan fans, because some of these fans are like whip puppies, you guys. Like they're just expecting if we get a big commit, well, when are they going to decommit? They got the guys in their head now that two guys from Kirby Smart's backyard that decided that they were going to give a verbal commitment on an unofficial visit, and as soon as they flip, that means USC can't recruit anymore. I mean, recruiting is fickle, and sometimes the fans are even more fickle. Let's put it that way.
I'm going to make a measured statement based on the recruiting rankings with USC right now, because this cornerback that they pick up from Georgia, 60th rated at his position, Dorian Brew, was a number 7 rated cornerback that just committed to Oregon a couple days ago. Now, these are recruiting rankings, and do they mean something? Typically, but they're like slots in anything that's being ranked. Sometimes I question, how close those slots are. Sometimes the distance between number 1 and number 15 is minimal. Sometimes it's sizable, and sometimes it will turn out to be nothing. But Oregon made 2 enormous pickups this week here in the last few days, and they beat out Ohio State, who was their main competitor.
Yeah.
For both of them. I can't recall. The other was the running back. Absolutely.
Yeah,
although Ohio State, I think, has 4 of the top 5 cornerbacks in this class. So I didn't know that they needed 6 of the top 7, but Dorian Brew chose Oregon. So just to stir things up, I just thought I would throw that out there. Again, I haven't evaluated the guys. Tim, you astutely went to the offer sheet and the offer list, which is meaningful. Absolutely.
But I'm not so enamored by the recruiting rankings. We're not going. Don't worry, Mark. We're not having that conversation again this week. But the other one, the running back Davidson from Mater Dei. I mean, neither one of those guys really, like you said, it was pretty much Oregon and Ohio State down the stretch. But USC was kind of in a little bit for Brew, but not expect. It wasn't an expected loss for USC, in my opinion. It's a long time. Again, USC fans, you got to realize it's been a long time since USC was at anywhere near this conversation. You're talking about a bunch of kids that did not grow up wearing USC Trojan t-shirts and gear. It's been a long time. It's hard to say as a Trojan. It's kind of humbling. But 6 years of Clay Helton led to a lot of kids, just kind of losing that momentum you had under Pete Carroll. I mean, really, honestly, first the NCAA came at us and then and sanctioned us, and then USC sanctioned itself with a bunch of bad hires constantly. Bad hires either at head coach or at the coordinator position, and this is what years of that's going to give you. It's going to take a couple of years of on-field, proof that these kids are getting coached up and that they're getting developed. And these kids are going to the NFL. And then you're going to see it's going to pay dividends. USC coaches, for instance, you look at Coach Henney, he's been a pro coach. he doesn't have these relationships that you have, like a number of these other defensive line coaches have throughout the country. He's making inroads. Well, I mean, one big one he has is Jakeem Stewart, which is, we could talk about him later, the number 1 2026 defensive lineman that might be reclassifying, and is a heavy lean to be coming to USC. Matter of fact, I believe Rivals even gave them a crystal ball to USC. But SC's gonna have to show it on the field. And I've said this for years. NIL's a big part of it, but getting kids to the NFL is the biggest part of it. And it's going to take a little while for USC to show they can do that. And once you get that traction going, some wins on the field, that's how you begin to make your big momentum. It's not all NIL. It's completely not all NIL. It's going to take a little bit of time. And how it starts is this year on the field.
And quickly, just to summarize my point, I am not evaluating these two players. I know nothing about the two players. This is not specific to those two players or any two players. It's more specific to, over the course of time in groupings, if you are bringing in the 50th and 60th rated at some position, and your competitors, the best teams in the conference, are bringing in the top 5, the top 10 at that position, over time in mass, that is a significant difference.
Well, I mean, that's true, but it's not like USC didn't bring in Marcellus Williams last year. One of the, probably, I think, if you had asked me, he's one of, if not the best cornerback last year, and he's already showing flashes in the spring game, just how what an exceptional freshman he is. This is dynamic, and like you said, at Ohio State, it's really difficult to bring in yet another blue chip corner when that room gets. Some of these rules about recruiting still remain the same. These kids' goals are to get early playing time, to increase that NIL, to get out of school in 3 years to get to the NFL, the top of the top cream of the crop. So when you start stacking, you're not going to be able to stack these rooms like you used to be able to do. I mean, it's part of the reason why USC got Bear Alexander from Georgia. You have elite players sitting behind people. I mean, how will Ohio State be able to keep all of these cornerbacks they're pulling in? Who knows, right? I mean, it is the age of the transfer portal. So you can only play 2, maybe 3 corners on the field at a time. How many of them are going to sit there and wait behind the other guys? So it's early still, guys. It's starting to shape up. That's why we're talking about it right now, because I think over the next couple of weeks, like we talk about, all these official visits are done. You're going to start seeing the beginnings of these classes shape up. And I think for the most part, what you have is what you're going to get. There will be some changes and flips. There will be some late additions, late in the season. But slowly it's starting to form. And I saw some guy on one of our comments in one of the videos talking about how USC is the number 32 team rankings on 247. Remember how 247 does this? We explained this on the show a while back. The difference between on 3 and 247 is the 247 keeps a point total. So if you've got 28, like let's say, like Rutgers, for instance, number 12 in the country, right, in recruiting, but they have 28, 22 of those are 3 stars. I'm not crapping on the star system. I'm just saying that's why they're at number 12, because they have 28 commitments. USC has 12 commitments right now. So let's just slow down the doom and gloomers out there thinking that we're not going to have a good recruit. Because I guarantee you guys, we are going to have a really good recruit. As a matter of fact, in the chat, if you guys want to, I put a poll in there. If you guys want to take a look at it, where do you think USC is going to end up? Are they going to be a top 10? Are they going to be a top 20, top 15? Where do you think USC's class actually ends up?
13.
Oh, 13?
Off the top of my head. Sounds
Okay.
about right.
I think they're top 10 finish. I'm thinking somewhere in the 7, 8, 9 range is where I think SC will finish up.
Well,
Matt, any real prediction? I know how
wherever USC does land, in terms of being able to calibrate how well USC actually is doing in recruiting, one thing is skewing perceptions, right or wrong, and that is how well Dan Lanning and Oregon are doing. Saw a stat over the weekend from college football analyst and recruiting analyst Bud Elliott. He noted that Oregon's number of 4 and 5 stars for the coming class is greater than the other 3 incoming West Coast Big Ten programs combined. So Washington, UCLA, and USC. Oregon has more than the other 3 incoming Big Ten schools combined. So like that's just setting the bar at such a high level that even if USC does have a class that's maybe, you know, back end of the top 10, let's say 8 to 10, which is, you know, really good, just the way Oregon's performing on the trail, that is distorting perceptions because the Ducks, if you compare just USC and Oregon in a vacuum, I mean, Lanning is just getting all these splashes and all these home runs. And certainly in the short term, that's something USC just has to live with. And it underscores the point that we need to see that NFL development in a very real way this year, because if we don't see substantial progression this year, then USC is going to be left behind. But if we see that development, which, you know, I think we're going to see it with Danton Lynn, Coach Henney, woof, woof, the dog work, Doug Belk, Matt Entz. I mean, I think we are going to see it, but the pressure is on to actually deliver that because Oregon definitely is just setting the bar so much higher than USC right now.
They hit the ball running. It's like they were masters of the NIL before NIL came out. And what they did, how they structured the NIL with Division Street is amazing. It's really amazing. I mean, it's been top notch since the beginning. They have a bunch of retired Nike execs that are working in their NIL that know what the hell they're doing, instead of USC, which seems like it was fumbling its way through this process for a number of years. I believe they are now there. I have heard that the funding is now there at USC. It's just how it's structured and how they're getting the money to the kids, whether it be for-profit or non-profit, is one of the issues that they're having. Whether that's true or not, it's just what I'm hearing. It appears that at places like, for years, Texas A&M, Miami, Oregon, Ohio State, it just seems like this NIL has been running perfectly. And at a couple of schools, I mean, Oregon was doing fine even before NIL really became, you know, a big thing. It just started a little bit, you know, when Mario Cristobal was there and kind of got rolling with especially the offensive linemen. And USC's been playing catch up. I don't think that, I know that stat is amazing, but when the other two are two teams are getting brand new head coach. I mean, when you have a head coach coming in, it's kind of hard to retain or even keep or even make money. I mean, you're talking about UCLA and their recruiting classes. I mean, Chip Kelly didn't even recruit. And then you go over to Washington, who's never really lighting the world on fire, but, you know, starting fresh and starting all over again. I'm sure they're going to have difficulty getting those top name recruits. So that really just leaves USC when it comes to Oregon. But I mean, what's Oregon, number 3 or 4 in the country in recruiting right now? So nothing's changed. They've been tearing it up the last couple of years. And quite frankly, with their NIL, I don't see many things changing. One thing for Oregon, though, is what you just talked about, Matt, and I've talked about, is they're going to need to start showing it. And these guys getting into the NFL as well, they got to show that development. They got to show some wins. I mean, they had trouble. They couldn't even win the Pac-12. They've had these great rosters. They've had the best roster in the Pac-12 for a couple of years now, and they can't even win the conference. So this is going to be a big year. We're talking about a big year for USC. This will be a big year for Oregon and that coaching staff. Because quite frankly, I think that's the thing that limits Oregon, not their players, is the coaching staff that they have might be holding them back. So is this the composite? Is this 247? What is this?
I believe this is 247. I think that's what they show us on their rankings. I believe. Yeah. No, this is the composite.
Okay.
It says powered by 247 Sports Composite. And of course, it's June. I want to take something you said about the player ranking, Tim. So USC's at 21, but their average player rankings at 90.5. So that's better than 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, practically 10. And 9 really teams ahead of them.
And with the exceptions of your Ohio States, Alabamas, Georgias, and Oregons, it's really competitive with everyone. And we're talking about what difference. We're splitting hairs at 1 point, 1 point or 1.2 or 0.75. So really outside of those top 4, which we're killing it. Why? Because they're playing great ball on the field. They've got great NIL. And it's not surprised that they're doing so well. So, I mean, outside of those four, USC is competitive with basically everyone. And quite frankly, you look at Texas A&M right there with all that money they're throwing around, and USC is just right there with them, you know.
Dude, look at Notre Dame. For as high as they are at number 4, that looks mighty impressive. But to your point, 21 commits, 91.1, 90.6. Is that big a deal between Notre Dame and USC?
Yeah. I mean, and they're going to, like we talked about, Mark, they're going to re-rank it. Some of these 4 stars will be 5 stars. Some of the 5 stars will be 4 stars. It's all going to get their shuffle work, depending on where you end up sometimes. And then I don't know how they do the re-rankings, especially with the one that really just trips me out is after the season, after the high school season's over, and then they have a re-ranking, you know, after these all-star games. Like when has an all-star game ever told anyone anything about a player? I mean, ever. So, I mean, we're not going down that road again, but
that's what the All-Star game is, Tim. If we're talking about the NFL Pro Bowl back in the day, no, that told us nothing because those guys are secure in being the best players in the NFL. If we're talking about guys that are trying to impress college football scouts or NFL scouts, and they're competing against their peers from across the country, I would think that competition means something. If you watch wide receiver and defensive, like if you saw the top 5 wide receivers and the top 5 cornerbacks in the nation continually do reps against one another, you don't think
where you probably get more out of the practices? I would say you probably get more out of the practices than anything else, right? Like reps against each other in practice. So you probably do in a game because, I mean, you know, you're running a system you're not familiar with, you know, especially if you're a quarterback. You know, and you don't have a lot of time with the receivers. The timing's really not there. I don't know. I mean, I guess you could learn some things about some positions. I bet you on the line you can learn quite a bit. But the skill positions, I don't know how much you're learning.
See, I flip-flopped it in terms of my evaluation because that wide receiver cornerback matchup is more of a basketball one-on-one matchup than anything else on the field to me. That it's in space. They're just 2 players competing against each other for the football.
Well, you're going again. You have a receiver and a quarterback that don't know each other very well, that don't probably know the offense that well. I mean, they know routes. I think you probably learn more on the lines because on the lines when you watch these kids in high school, they're competing against, you know, inferior competition. But I think when you get to these events, the one thing where I think is important is you get these events and they're playing on against the best on the line. That's where I think you really will. There will be an uptick and you'll be able to see how well these guys perform against better players and their peers, not just some 5'10", 210-pound defensive tackle across the way from you that you absolutely destroy. So I mean, you know, that's my take on it.
Comments and questions are welcome, folks. Trojan Conquest Live. Every Monday, we get together with all of you at 7 Pacific time. And of course, Tim and Matt take your calls every Friday. That's after my Big Ten show. Catch us for the Big Ten Live show over on the main channel at 7 Eastern, 4 Pacific. And then right over here for Tim and Matt on the USC call-in show.
So I wanted to highlight this point from the forgotten man. Lanning is using the bag to recruit. He's not a better recruiter. He just lures. Forgotten man. Let's put it very, very simply. If Mark Helfrich or Willie Taggart was Oregon coach, is all of this happening? Okay, let's just put that in perspective. Now, Mario Cristobal, given what he's doing in Miami, despite a not very good record, kind of a separate silo, kind of a separate conversation. But if it's Taggart or Helfrich, is Oregon doing anything remotely close to this? Be honest, okay? So we have to put that in context when evaluating Dan Lanning. You know, does he have help? Does he have the infrastructure? Does he have a sugar daddy who really cares about football success? Yes, he does. But the coach has to put it all together. The coach has to take advantage of that situation, just as a coach has to take advantage of talent on the field and turning it into championships, which, of course, that's the thing that Dan Lanning has not yet proven he can do. Like if you want a weakness in Dan Lanning, it's on the field, you know, and it's going for it on 4th and 4 when a field goal helps your chances of winning a ball game. But in terms of recruiting, let's not diminish what he's doing, because if that's Helfrich, if that's Taggart, this is not happening in Eugene.
I'm not a Dan fan for sure, but the man can recruit. He was a good recruiter back at Georgia. Tosh Dupuy for years has been known as a strong recruiter. So it's not all bag, but that bag, Matt, is one hell of a hefty bag. So yeah, no, they would be getting recruits. I think it's not just 100% money. You know, it also helps when you win. I mean, it's not like Oregon's not winning. You know, I mean, Oregon is one of the favored teams in the Big Ten this year. I mean, all these things contribute to the cachet you need in order to get top recruits. But that let's not mince words. A number of their recruits and a lot of their wins, and a lot of their momentum is definitely the Daddy Knight money, Uncle Phil money, for sure.
Speaking of rankings, folks, you may want to go to the main channel and check out the preseason edition of the Top 25 That Actually Makes Sense, which I honestly and am very transparent in saying it goes against my grain to even produce a preseason Top 25 That Actually Makes Sense. But I was asked to many times because it flies in the face of everything the Top 25 That Actually Makes Sense is. It's based on results. So I clearly state that, but I said, people have been asking for it. So here it is. And to make it as true to principle as possible, we are basing it on last year's performance, last year's team, and then making a judgment about additions and subtractions, the coaching staff and so forth. But I do not rank based on schedule projections. They've got a tough schedule. They've got an easy schedule. No, these are simply the 25 teams that I believe to be 1 through 25 in terms of the best teams in the country, number 1 through number 25. You'll have to check out where I've got USC placed, if they are in fact in the top 25.
I was surprised with Louisville. I'm wondering what Louisville's done, what Louisville's added in order to get ahead. Oh, spoiler, that they are ahead of USC. I was trying to figure out what Louisville might have done.
Oh, you checked me out, huh, on that? Okay.
I'm a Mark Rogers fan. Why am I even in this chair right now? Is because I used to call in and bother you on the phone. Is how this whole thing got rolling. Well, we could talk about later on, Mark. But I was a bit, that one threw me a little bit. Was what did Louisville add? So I was just, that's my one gripe. Without going too far.
That's understandable. That is understandable. Okay. Where are we headed next on this? We're going to have a Minnesota preview for all of you. We're doing an opponents series. We've talked LSU. We've talked Michigan. Check out those shows if you've missed them, because we had excellent conversations with Michigan and LSU media on those matchups coming up in September that are just going to be fascinating.
And Penn State.
We'll get to the rest of the Big Ten opponents.
And Penn State.
And Penn State, we did Penn State last week. Absolutely. Yes, we did.
Are we still waiting for the Minnesota preview, or has that boat sailed? Has that boat rowed away?
Oh no.
Well, knowing our media contributor from Minnesota, he typically responds in some fashion, so he must have forgotten us.
Oop, I didn't mean to pop that up.
In the absence of that, just with Minnesota, one has to wonder if PJ Fleck is a spent force in Big Ten coaching, not necessarily college football coaching, but Big Ten coaching. Because when you blow a big fourth quarter lead to Northwestern, and I know that Northwestern did overachieve last year, but like that Northwestern team, which did overachieve, did not have high-end talent. And like if you're Minnesota, you have no business blowing a multi-possession, multi-touchdown lead late against Northwestern. And so with those kinds of things happening under PJ Fleck, like early in his tenure, we were wondering if Fleck was getting Minnesota closer to a Rose Bowl standard. He did come fairly close earlier on the job in Minneapolis, but he missed his chance. He couldn't beat Wisconsin at home late in the season when Paul Chryst was still coaching the Badgers. And, at Minnesota, you don't get that many bites at the apple. Those kinds of opportunities, they don't come around regularly. They did under Bernie Bierman and Murray Warmath, but not today in the 21st century. So he had his chance, he missed, and a similar chance has not come along. And you just have to wonder if everything's gotten stale. And one of the big red light, 5-alarm fires for PJ Fleck at Minnesota is that, when you remember, he took Western Michigan to a New Year's Six bowl game, and he did that with a really good passing attack. What's the thing that PJ Fleck hasn't been able to formulate at Minnesota? A passing attack. The passing offense has been not just average, it's been dreadful. He's actually done a really good job of developing running backs, but the passing game has just utterly deserted him. It's utterly eluded Fleck at Minnesota. That has been the really big puzzler, the really big head scratcher for Fleck. And so, when you consider USC's matchup against Minnesota, it's hard to feel especially concerned or especially worried from a Trojan vantage point, just because, where does Minnesota's offense hurt USC's defense? What's going to be the thing in that matchup that Minnesota can look to and say, aha, this is where we can really exploit USC. Minnesota is one of a few teams on this schedule where you're thinking, how does Minnesota score? How does this USC opponent score? And I know after 2 years of Alex Grinch, that might seem weird to think about, but we know that this year the defensive coaching is going to be better at USC. And I'm looking at Minnesota and I'm just wondering, where do the Gophers find enough points to make that game, really close in the fourth quarter, let alone win? And so that's really part of the PJ Fleck story right now. It's just how stale Minnesota's been and how limited the Gophers' passing attack has been. And unless or until we see real proof that the passing game has actually been beefed up, that there's actually some vertical potency that to go along with a smash mouth running game, until that emerges, it's hard to take Minnesota overly seriously.
Tim, go ahead, Tim.
Well, I was just going to say, and as Matt, you and I have talked about on both shows, the strength of this team is probably going to be the secondary. I just really do think it's for USC. So that just exacerbates, if you're going to come in with just a mediocre passing game, where USC, I think, is most susceptible to be beaten this year is two ways. One, a dominant offensive line that's going to wear down our defensive line, or just a superior passing attack, meaning you have an elite quarterback with elite receivers that can maybe try to pick apart the secondary. But USC, in a lot of ways, if you're going to try to run at us, I think that they are going to put a lot of guys up in the box, challenge you man to man. If you don't have the quarterback and the receivers to make them pay for that, it might be a long day for your offense.
So Tim teased us with a graphic that I would love to see him take off on, because I know that he's got a gripe about it, but I will take off on Minnesota first just to clear the conversation, since we brought up the Golden Gophers. So my thoughts is that I'm a PJ Fleck guy. He did do a nice job for 3 seasons there at Minnesota, as Matt alluded to, 11-2, 9-4, 9-4, his last 3 regulars or full seasons before last season. And this is a team that, if Vegas gets it right, if Vegas is right about Minnesota, they're going to have a dreadful season. And they were only 5-7 last year before a bowl win against a MAC team. So they went 6-7. Their win totals like 4.5 according to Vegas. They're supposed to have a bad season. Max Brosmer is an incoming transfer quarterback from New Hampshire, so he lit it up in the FCS. But we don't know how that is going to transfer. We do know that Ethan Kalkumanis, their previous quarterback, transferred to Rutgers and took over the starting job there. But they did have the aberration of a season, not just in the win column, Matt, but that 2019 team that you allude to that lost on the final day of the season to Wisconsin. They could have went to the Rose Bowl because Ohio State won the Big Ten, but went to the playoff. That was the team that could throw it, and that's why they were so much better. Tanner Morgan had a 30-6 TD to pick ratio, which was one of the best figures in the nation. They had Tyler Johnson. They had Oddman Bell at wide receiver. They had a dynamic offense for them, and a truly good offense, balanced offense. But since then, there's a stat out there that Minnesota, since that 2019 team, has thrown the ball less than any team in the nation that is not a military academy for 4 seasons. They have just buttoned it down and they just run it and rely on the defense. And that's how they play football. And that's generally worked in the Big Ten Western Division, but that's not going to work overall.
It has to be jarring for the people in Minneapolis to watch, Kirk Cousins throw the ball 55 times a game and then have PJ Fleck just going, pure Cro-Magnon Neanderthal caveman on Saturdays. I mean, that is football whiplash from Saturday to Sunday.
Absolutely. And one of their big reasons why they were successful is PJ Fleck's first season, they were headed toward a bad season. And he picked up Joe Rossi, who took over his defense late in the year, and he's been exceptional. Well, he left for Michigan State this offseason, so they have some big shoes to fill on the defensive side too. And one of the best players in the Big Ten, Tyler Nubin, their All-America safety, is off to the NFL.
Mark, you follow the Big Ten closely, of course. Let me ask you something. What's your view of all these rotating Big Ten coordinators? Because you had Kirk Ciarrocca being under Fleck, and then he left and he went to Penn State, and there's been a shuffling of coordinators involving Minnesota, Penn State, Rutgers, other schools, maybe. Like it's kind of amazing how many coordinator changes and exchanges there have been within the Big Ten over the past several years. So, like, what are you making of this? It does seem a little bit aberrational to have this many coordinator changes within a conference. It's been a little bit conspicuous from where I sit.
Well, I have to think that they're taking a page out of the Matt Zemek textbook for structuring a coaching staff, thinking, hey, we need somebody from inside the conference that knows these opponents, that knows how we play football in this conference. And that gives the familiarity, and then also just the application of this guy. I'm comfortable with him because I know what he's schemed against me. I know what I've seen on tape year after year after year at these various stops. So I want him on my side now.
I think it's interesting that these coordinators, though, are willing to make these changes. Coaching against a former opponent. For some people it's easy, for others not so much. But certainly for several Big Ten coordinators, they're not sweating it.
Okay, Tim.
One more thing. I was counting out the 4.5 wins, and the good news for them is they have Iowa at home, USC at home, and Penn State at home. 3 of them were difficult games. But
person in the chat made the point, and it's a good one, that Minnesota is going to be playing USC the week after going to Ann Arbor. So that's something that does work in favor of USC. And I know that USC is playing this Minnesota game between the Wisconsin and Penn State home game. So that makes it a trap game for USC. But the fact that Minnesota is coming off the Michigan game, that makes this game just a little bit less of a potential pothole for USC. So that's good to know.
So there you have it. Well, a lot of people looking forward to this EA Sports game that's coming out, I believe, July 19th. I would not be numbered among those, but A lot of people are. And there's been a lot of discussion this week and a lot of criticism of the various rankings on both sides of the ball. And as it pertains to USC on the offensive side, we are looking at Lincoln Riley on the left, but we are looking at USC ranked, what,
25th. And what this person did, I can't, you guys probably on TV, that his name, his Twitter handle's there in the middle. I can't read. It's too damn small on my screen. But what he did was he put the yards per play right now, which is a great metric of offense and scoring, and the yards per play would probably be two of the better metrics. And USC was ranked third in this power ranking. And then everyone's going to be quick to say, well, yeah, because they had Caleb Williams last year, and this year they don't. Lincoln Riley has scored less than 40 points in a season as a head coach one time in 2021, and he scored 39 points in that season. So his offenses have consistently been among the best. If you took it, which is not really the best stat, but if you get total yards, he's the lowest he's ever been was that same year. He was ranked 8th in the country. The last couple of years at USC, he's in the top 3, and I'm not sure exactly what their thinking is. Again, it's a video game, just like a lot of these simulators. I see some of you guys out there in the chat getting really mad about these simulations that go on the internet. They're simulations, you guys. If you watch, you're seeing what I was watching about 5 minutes of it just for fun, and I'm watching Miller Moss run the option 5 or 6 times. I'm saying this is probably not the offense that's going to be run this season. One, because Miller Moss probably won't make it through the first quarter if he runs the option 8 times in a row like the simulation was doing. But also, it's supposed to be entertainment. And this is a power ranking for a video game. And I'm sure what they do is they try to balance it out, right? If you look at the defensive rankings, USC's defensive rankings are actually better than their offensive rank. I think they're like 16th. So USC's come out of nowhere from being like one of the worst, barely in the top 110 teams in defense. And now all of a sudden they shot all the way up to 16. I think that anyone that's taken these too seriously might be a bit disappointed when the season starts. It's just a video game. And I don't, what's disturbing though, is if you look at the blurb that they have, they talk about how they poured over, piles of PFF rankings and data and statistics to come up with all this stuff. And yet they came up with USC being the 16th best defense and the 25th best offense. I don't know. It's just kind of surprising to me.
I don't put any kind of stock in these rankings, but I'm just wondering if in the age of NIL and the transfer portal, if something like this is going to feed into any kind of narrative or perception about the actual strength of a program. I mean, I can't imagine that it's going to have any meaningful effect on recruiting, but there's so much absurdity to go around in college sports that I'm wondering if this ever becomes any sort of talking point in some household or in some conversation. But I don't think it is, but you never know.
Right. Yeah, I just thought it was kind of interesting, and it did seem a bit weird. I mean, to anybody, if you want to talk about USC's defense, let the arrows fly. But if you're really going to talk about a top 10 offense and not have Lincoln Riley's USC Trojans in a top 10, and that's being conservative, I don't know. I think that's clearly there's some bias involved, is all I'm to say. I don't know if they do the power rankings as a whole, so they're just trying to make a hierarchy of teams for these simulations. Matt, I'm with you. I really don't know what the purpose of this is, but just looking at the teams that are above USC for the defense, for the offensive side of the ball, that they feel that that there's going to be a better offensive team. Like, do we really think that 80% of those teams above them are going to have better offenses than USC and Lincoln Riley? I don't know. It was all over Twitter. People were all up in arms about it. But I think too much time. I think we're giving it more oxygen than it deserves even right now. But it is a big thing.
USC is going to have a better offense than NC State. They're going to have a better offense than Texas A&M. And I'm not even talking about or mentioning teams that they should have a better offense than I'm going to bring up the most obvious situations here. SMU, Memphis. Now, it depends on how you consider rating group of five. If you're rating them against their schedule, they may have better numbers. USC is going to have a better offense than Clemson and Utah.
USC's got a better offense than most of the teams on this. If the question mark we have, we know they needed to fix the offensive line, and was Miller Moss an aberration? But we can only go off of what we've seen. You know, a number of the teams that are ranked ahead of USC have new offensive coordinators, have new quarterbacks as well. I mean, that's one thing. You know, I mean, how good is LSU? They have LSU at what? I can't see the numbers. So I mean, what 2, 4, 6? You know, with the replacing their quarterback, our USC's receivers are far better. I think the running backs are on par, if not USC's are better. I mean, I'm just looking straight across the board, almost every position except for offensive line. But even then, we don't know how good this offensive line is going to be for USC. I think this offensive line could be one of the better offensive lines in the Big Ten. I really do think it can.
I could make an argument for 75% of the teams above USC. I'm not saying that they're better offensively. I'm saying I could make an argument for them.
Mark, do you see this offense, USC, being outside, let's say the top, let's be really conservative, let's be super conservative. You think this could be outside the top 15 offenses in the country?
Well, we have to take into consideration. Are you just talking about yards per game? That's the metric we're going by.
I would say yards per play and scoring.
Okay, yards per play and scoring. Their schedule is going to factor into that, of course. And they are playing at Michigan. They are playing Wisconsin and Penn State. They don't see Ohio State, Oregon. They don't see Iowa, 3 of the better defenses in the conference. So they've got a formidable schedule. And Notre Dame, who I think is going to have a top 10 defense in the country. I would bet that USC is going to be top 15 in offense. I'm not overly confident in that prediction, but I would certainly lean that way.
How am I lying to myself? I mean, this is an interesting comment. I don't know what you mean. How am I lying that it's going to not be one of the better? I've seen our left tackle. I've seen our center. I think both our guards, we've gotten a lot bigger. The question mark I really have is how well are they going to play as a unit? I don't know. I said the majority of teams, there's 18 teams now. That means they got to be better than 8 teams of the 18 in order to have better than the majority of them. I don't know really where you're maybe lying to yourself to think that there's 10 offensive lines that can be better than USC's offensive line. So I mean, I don't know how I'm lying to myself. I didn't say USC's got the top offensive line, in the Big Ten or the country. That's not what that would probably be lying to myself. But I've been high on this offensive line for almost a full year now, and I think it's going. I think that this group. Sorry, I wasn't high on USC's offensive line last year. This group of linemen that are now coming into their sophomore season, their second year at USC, I am very high on to go along with the veterans like Monheim, and I think that Elijah Page and has shown that he can be an elite left tackle. I just really do think he could be that. So, yeah, I think this is one of the better offensive lines in the Big Ten. I mean, you guys could call it optimism, but start calling out some offensive lines that we know are better than that offensive line I'm talking about. I mean, you probably
it's not as though anyone's saying that Purdue is going to have a better offensive line than USC. It's not as though Illinois is going to have a better offensive line than USC. It's not as though Indiana is going to have a better offensive line than USC. I mean, Tim wasn't saying best in the Big Ten, just better than most, hey, I'm a Josh Henson skeptic, and I still would say that USC is going to have a better offensive line than most of the 18 schools in the Big Ten.
I don't have the Phil Steele publication in front of me, but it'll be interesting. Maybe next week we can go through his rankings of USC in the Big Ten, his position unit rankings, to see what you guys think.
Yeah. I don't know. That came as a surprise to me. I didn't think I'd get that much pushback. I mean, it's not like I'm delusional. Like I'm just throwing it out there because I like USC. Anyone that watched that offensive line play, in the Holiday Bowl, they did a solid job. And I really do think kicking Monheim inside, I mean, he's learning a new position, but I think he could be really solid. I think it's going to be a huge improvement in the interior of this offensive line. And I know that the left side is going to be absolutely solid with Page. I mean, those are two things I'm hanging my assessment on, are those two things. Could I be wrong? Absolutely. I thought last year's offensive line was going to be really good just based upon the pieces that they brought in. I mean, it's a unit where you really don't know until there's live bullets and they're sitting there and they're playing together as a unit. I mean, it might fall apart. That's a very serious point, but I just don't see it. I don't think that that's going to happen because we got a little taste of it. I mean, those guys, they threw them together at the end of the season against a pretty good pass rush. I mean, Louisville gave Notre Dame fits in their game. This was all over the quarterback, and USC did a pretty good job protecting Miller Moss. So there you go. There's a super chat for you, Mark.
There we go. DML. We appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for the contribution. I just can't wait for the Big Ten to find out how much of a choke artist Oregon is as a football program. 5 stars, 4 stars, they'll find a way to always lose.
Well, I would say that Oregon is set up extremely well. If you ask me right now what the Big Ten championship game matchup is going to be, I would say it's going to be Oregon and Ohio State. That said, if Lanning does not have Oregon, and I'm going to say, Oregon's pretty much a slam dunk for the playoffs since the playoff is now 12 teams. I'm going to say if Oregon does not make the semis, Final Four, in one of the next 2 seasons, then I'm not sure that he can just keep that recruiting gravy train rolling at the level it has been performing. I think that he does need to cash in one of the next few seasons. So, as great as it is at Oregon, and, I think Oregon's probably going to be in the semis this season. But if Lanning can't get Oregon to that level in the next few years, at some point recruits have to buy into, actually winning and actually, winning the biggest games. Will he be able to sustain that if he falls short again in a big game, much as he has against Kalen DeBoer last year, and also the other games that slipped through his fingers in 2022. So it's high stakes poker for Dan Lanning, that's for sure. Whether he's going to fail or not this year remains to be seen, but there's certainly a lot of intrigue around that question.
And I do like a lot of question marks for me last year were I hate to say, God, it hurts to say it, but I mean, I really liked Will Stein's offense, and that was surprising to me. I knew that he was a hot shot, new up and coming OC, but what he was able to do, offensively was solid and should give Oregon fans a lot of, because I know the defense a bit, but the offense really should, and the way Will Stein's running it, should give you guys a lot of optimism. I do think that you guys are going to be able to move the ball if you stay injury free. A couple key injuries, and that's going to derail really fast. But
so I was critical of Lanning in the 2 losses to Washington, and it wasn't simply an analysis of, he went for it on 4th and 4, he could have kicked a field goal, they didn't get it, that's a bad decision. No. There were real football reasons and game management that I don't have at the top of my head, remembering time, score, flow of the game, all of those things. But I know at the time I was extremely critical, and there were other reasons why, not just that it didn't work, but it tactfully, in a tactical way, was not the decision to make. The play that he called, it was like 4th and 4. They were out near midfield, where they were still able to get the ball back one other time and then miss the field goal at the end in Seattle. But you're like throwing a prayer to a wide receivers and say, like, they didn't draw up anything of consequence to get anybody open on a 4th and 4 play. So that was just a foolish play and just a 15% chance of a play. And there were just other reasons that I did not think he coached a good game in either matchup against Washington. However, I'm not one that really throws in the towel or forms a narrative on a guy after 2 seasons, especially since he took over a good program, a top 15 to 20 program in the country under Mario Cristobal, and elevated them. They had a really good season. They won the Holiday Bowl the year before. They went 10-3. They were a top 10 team. This past season, they were even better than that. They were one of the 7 or 8 best teams in the country, but they just didn't get the job done, of course. And they outgained Washington by about 150 yards in that matchup in Seattle. So, yeah, he has something to prove, but I watched Tom Osborne lose a lot of big games for about 10 or 15 years, and others like Bobby Bowden, and then they kicked it through.
And this is the one that keeps going back and forth all the time. People keep saying that Lanning was offered the job and turned down the job at Bama, but I've always wondered, do you guys on the panel, I'll ask you, Mark, flat up, and you, Matt. I mean, if you're hiring, don't you pick the guy that beat him twice? And it's not like DeBoer is some scrub. I honestly, even at the time and even now, every time I see this, it was Kalen DeBoer was the guy that had the lesser roster. He had a great quarterback, solid offensive line, good corner that's now over at Oregon right now. But in reality, Oregon should have won that game and it had the better players as far as the overall roster is concerned. And he just could not beat DeBoer. That was the thing that USC got heat for, is we got lost twice to Utah, in our season, going 11-1. And it was exactly the same thing that Oregon did the next year. But yeah, he almost got a pass for it. And the funny thing is one of the times we lost was we lost Caleb to a hamstring. So, I mean, we could talk all day long if he was the number one guy for the job, but everything points towards DeBoer. And it's funny because the national media now talks like DeBoer is, and for good reason, but the national media talks about like DeBoer is, oh yeah, no brainer, one of the top 3 coaches in the country. And that's how they talk about him now. I'm not hearing Lanning talk that same way. So I don't know if Lanning turned down the Alabama job. I mean, that's never been verified, but I hear a lot of Duck fans throw it around quite often.
I think DeBoer's a safer selection. He comes across more as an adult. And I just think he's got a higher floor than Lanning does. We know that he has gone through stop after stop after stop after stop, FCS, Group of 5, Pac-12, top program, top 15 program in the nation, and won at every stop. So he's proven himself over and over and over and over. Where Lanning walked into a great situation at Oregon. He's had 2 nice seasons. I think he's just proven far less. And so Alabama was going for, from a personality and approach standpoint, more of an Alabama established SEC kind of guy, and less for the hot shot that could not turn out to be quite as good as what he's shown to be early.
I mean, what DeBoer's done, even going back to Fresno State, and then what he did at Washington. Sure, it's kind of meaner. He didn't have a huge resume of seasons and wins, but what he has had, he's been dominant. So yeah, that's why I know. Matt, your thoughts on that? Do you think, or you don't want to weigh in on that at all?
DeBoer 3-0 against Lanning, and he did it. He's beaten him in Eugene, he's beaten him in Seattle, and he's beaten him on a neutral field. So, it's really hard to argue around that when you're comparing just DeBoer and Lanning. That pretty much speaks for itself. Before we close things down in this show, want to mention, I saw in the chat, our friend Will ND. He mentioned that his dad passed away the other day. And so, Will, we want to extend our condolences to you. And, hey, you're here wanting to talk college football with us. We hope we've given you a little bit of a distraction, but like our thoughts and prayers are definitely with you and your extended family right now. And we're very sorry to hear that sad news.
Absolutely, Will. Oh my God, my love goes out to you. You definitely know I'm in your prayers, and you're in my prayers. If there's anything I can do, just my number. Give me a call.
Yeah, Will. You're our guy, and we love you and respect you here at the Voice of College Football. So just to reiterate what both Matt and Tim had to say, do not hesitate if for any reason we can help you in any way. You've got my contact information as well. So please do that. Folks, we do come your way each and every Monday and Friday here at the Voice of College Football, so you can catch up with Tim and with Matt this Friday, the USC Call-In Show. It is your show. You drive it. You produce it. It is the caller-driven show, as Tim likes to say, every Friday. So please join us then. Otherwise, we will be back here next Monday. In the meantime, it's Trojan's Wire, and that's the place to be each and every day for USC sports coverage with Tim and with Matt. All right, gentlemen.
One other thing definitely want to say. If you're thinking about spending money on fireworks, okay, first off, you shouldn't be shooting off fireworks because they're traumatic for pets, all right? I have 2 dogs and several cats, and it's just absolutely murder for them. They're cowering in the corner in fear. I mean, really, if you're going to shoot off fireworks, go into the middle of the desert, all right? Where there's no one to bother you. If you're gonna do something like that, like find an alternative place, not in the middle of a damn urban neighborhood, okay? That's one. But second, if you're thinking about spending your money, then you can contribute to USC's NIL, all right? Instead of fireworks, all right? If you want to compare what's a good use of funds, one's a lot better than the other. And third, simply, hope you all have a great 4th of July. Hope you all take a break from the madness and are able to just cool down and calm down in the middle of the summer and enjoy the Independence Day with your friends and family here at the Voice of College Football.
And many of us are going to drink. Just don't be stupid. Don't be selfish. If you get a drink, Uber is so cheap these days. There is zero reason to drink and drive. Zero.
Absolutely. Well said. And Matt, I know more than anyone, I know that my sister would appreciate your thoughts about the fireworks in the neighborhood, because she's had a series of dogs who have she's done everything to get them away from fireworks, taken them on drives and done everything possible to get away from them. And yes, Tim with a good sentiment on this holiday as well. And also keep in mind, folks, Matt and I, 3 new segments are coming your way. USC channel membership here at the Voice of College Football. Please. Yes, the choice cuts. Absolutely. Folks, we'll see you back here next Monday. It's been great. We always love talking college football with all of you. And again, Trojans Wire is the place to be in the meantime with Tim and